The ANC estimates that the 17 million rand it spent on its policy conference will roughly be doubled or tripled for its national elective conference. The party is pressing forward with its demands to abolish the 15 million rand per year donation ceiling as it struggles to gather money for both its operations and the next national conference. The party wants the legislation altered to allow people to donate to political parties up to 100 million rand annually. To discuss the feasibility of such a move so soon after the Political Party Funding Act came into force, we're joined by the Executive Chairman of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Mr. Tselane. Thank you very much for availing yourself this morning. We understand that Minister Aaron Motsoaledi is seized with this matter, according to the party. But what do we need to understand about the processes that need to be followed in order to make this a reality?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think it is logical that the Party Funding Act would have to be revised, particularly because there are many things that have actually intervened since the passing of the law. One of those things is the fact that now independents are expected to participate in the elections. Now, when independents are supposed to be participating in the elections and are not covered by legislation, it is going to create an inconsistency in the application of that law. So that aspect would have to be covered and make sure that there is a revision. But also I think we need to understand in the first instance why this legislation was introduced. It was introduced largely for two things. One, to strengthen constitutional democracy by supporting political parties. And secondly, to regulate the relationship between money and politics, to make sure that elements of corruption that exist in society are attended to. So the revision or an amendment of the Act would only make logical sense.
It says that changing the Act can only be done through regulations that the President can enact. He's also the President of the country, not just the President of the ANC. So what should we read into that?
My view is that the matter must actually be taken to Parliament, and all the political parties must actually be able to have a conversation around this. As I've suggested, it is not only the issue that is affecting the amount that an organization or an individual can contribute towards a political party, but it relates to quite a number of other aspects within the society. And then because of its implications and the fact that now there are new arrangements that is going to be put in place in relation to independence, there is going to be a need to amend the whole Act and not try to insert one aspect that deals with only the regulations.
Just remind us in terms of the Political Party Funding Act, just how many political parties we've seen. I think to my knowledge, at least I could be mistaken, there's only been 2 political parties that have actually declared where they get their funding from, which should tell us what about the Act itself?
Well, that's why I think there are 3 political parties that have actually been consistently providing information about how they are getting funding. It is largely the DA, the ANC, as well as the Action SA. So as I've suggested to you, that there is going to be a need, therefore, to make sure that all other aspects that are making the implementation difficult are attended to, and this can't be done through just regulation. It is going to have to be a revision of the whole Act or an amendment of the Act itself.
You talked us through why the Act was enacted in the first place, talking about accountability and curbing corruption. We are also talking about a big organization, so it is not a big ask for them to want to have more money in order to fulfill their mandates, including paying staff that that are on or in their employ. So should political parties maybe think of more innovative ways of cutting costs, and maybe something like a conference like this, or not like this, but other conferences, having them online? We've seen what COVID-19 can do, for instance, in terms of bridging that gap. Instead of people meeting physically, they can meet online.
I think those are 2 separate arguments, but I understand the interlinkages between the two. Firstly, yes, there is a need for political parties to be a little bit more innovative and begin to deal with the issues that relate to how they manage their processes, including how they even manage their electoral processes. But the issue of a curb in terms of how much a political party has got to get, it's an issue that I think it's important not only for the political parties themselves, but also for the society as a whole. As I indicated earlier on, the purpose of the Act was not really to punish the political parties, and it does not only relate to the ANC, but it relates to all the political parties that are there, that are participating in the process, including the candidates. Therefore, the intention of the Act was to strengthen constitutional democracy, then it means mechanism must be found to make sure that all unintended consequences that has resulted from the application of this Act are dealt with. And then one of those is the fact that the electoral process has become expensive, and therefore political parties would obviously have to get a certain amount of money that would actually be able to enable them to participate in the electoral process effectively. And therefore, the issue of keeping the amount of 15 million per annum will, in the long run, be problematic not only for one political party, but for all the political parties. As long as there is transparency on how this is dealt with, and there is an agreement amongst political parties on how or what the cap should actually be in relation to the contribution that individuals and companies can make to a political party.
How are other organizations and political parties on the continent dealing with something like this?
The issue of party funding, not only in the continent but throughout the world, it's a matter that is being dealt with by various jurisdictions in different ways. There are certain jurisdictions where there is regulation of that relationship. Others have not. As you may be aware, South Africa only came to the party in about 2-3 years ago when this legislation was introduced. Before then, there was only one aspect that was only dealing with the political parties in South Africa, which was that funding of political parties from the fiscals was done through a particular formula. I think the formula that we were using by that time was 1910, which meant that a political party would get funding from the fiscals based 90% of the time on the number of seats it has, and 10% would actually be distributed equitably amongst the political parties. So it depends really which jurisdiction one is actually dealing with. But almost all the jurisdictions in the world assist with the issue of party funding, largely because of the corruption that is there in politics, but also to try to strengthen constitutional democracy.
Tselane is with the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa. Thank you.